Yeah, Joe, we have seen this total now work down. We'll talk more about the total, where it stands and where it could be in just a matter of moments. But 48.5, along with last year's total of 47 and a hook, would be the two lowest totals back to back. The only two over-unders for a Super Bowl officially, fewer than 49 points in the last 8 seasons. Now let's talk about these two teams and how they compare to one another. Joe, I think you're spot on in the idea that the Chiefs were always going to be the favorites for this game. They will remain the favorites, even if it's just by 1.5 points. We've got two of the 5 best defenses in the NFL. None better than Philadelphia. The Chiefs just keep winning single-score games. 17 consecutive, an NFL record, a perfect 12-0 the entirety of this year. How do you compare these two teams? Where do you think the advantages might be on one side versus the other?
Well, listen, I think it's amazing, Ben, since this is only the second time in the history of the NFL where we have two teams meeting within a 3-year period in the Super Bowl. There's a lot of similarities with these two teams, but there is a lot different from a few years ago here, Ben, and I think that's going to reflect in how you should be betting this game.
We will compare these two. We will look at the totals. We'll do everything. We'll ask some big picture questions in hour 2. But next up, we round out the opening hour, looking at the over-under next.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
To solve all this tush-push and fourth down malarkey that goes on with the officials, here's a crazy idea. Get rid of the worst rule in the NFL, and that is forward progress. How about this? Where I knock your ass in the ground is where the ball goes, period. Let's end this whole conversation. Like, if I drop you back 4 yards, then you lost 4 yards. If we get rid of forward progress, this tush-push and everything else is taken care of. Where I put your tail on the ground is where the ball goes. End of conversation. It's the dumbest rule and the most arbitrary rule. The only thing that is a worse call in the NFL than forward progress is the punt that goes out of bounds when you watch the official walk down the sideline having absolutely no clue where that ball crossed over. All I can think of is that Price is Right game go do-de-do-de-do, do-de-do-de-do, as he's walking down the sideline, arbitrarily trying to figure out where the ball crossed over because he's got no clue.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Let's talk the total for Super Bowl 59. It has slightly moved in the last 24 hours, now 9 days away from Super Bowl Sunday in the Big Easy. 49.5 was what the total was for Super Bowl 59 for most of this week. But as you will see there, it is now down by a full point to 48 and a hook. Again, we are talking just a single point. And Joe Ranieri shared with you before we got to the break what he expects out of the public later next week, about a week from now, Friday, Saturday, into the weekend, and of course, as we get to Super Bowl Sunday game day. Joe, just some history in terms of the total. Last year was 47 and a hook, and despite overtime, stayed under that number. We have been under our pregame totals in 5 of the previous 6 Super Bowls. The only over, the last time these two teams faced off in the biggest game. Super Bowl 57 out in Glendale, Arizona. Kansas City winning outright as an underdog, 38-35, over a total that was north of 50. Again, since Super Bowl 52, when the Eagles knocked off the Patriots, even a Super Bowl prior to that, Super Bowl 51. So we're talking our last 8 Super Bowls. This and last year would be the only 2 totals sub 49. So how do you read where the total stands right now?
So this is about right, Ben, because unlike a few years ago when these two teams met, they were much more offensive-oriented teams. And, you know, we didn't give a whole lot of credit there to Philadelphia's defense at that time. We didn't, you know, Spags always ends up having his guys ready by the playoffs was the narrative, but it was all about the high-flying offenses. That is not the case this year here, Ben. We've got Kansas City who will have no problem draining the clock, beating you by 3, having a chance to beat you with under 2 minutes to go. No shootouts. Philadelphia, even though they put up 55 points against Washington, their MO all year has been, we're going to win with defense. It's why you bring in Vic Fangio. It's why you spent the draft capital and the money on the defensive side. You wanted to have a defense, and they turned out to be the number 1 defense in the NFL. 17.5 points a game, somewhere along those lines. And quite honestly, if it wasn't for the Kansas City Chiefs defense this year, they're not 15-2, Ben. They're not 15-2 because Mahomes and the offense were lighting teams up. They're 15-2 because that defense has been maybe the best that we've seen in a while here with Kansas City. So I think the 2 defensive units are the best units on the field. And I think given the fact that they have 2 great defensive-minded, the DCs there are the best in the game with a couple extra weeks to prepare. I don't see how. I think the total is exactly where it should be there, Ben, because I think this game's a lot closer to 45 than I do think it's to 50.
And you see those updated team totals now with some movement in the overall number itself. And, of course, a couple of cents here and there on the money line. 24.5 for KC, 23.5 for Philadelphia. The over on the juice ever so slightly for both. There's a lot of offensive talent, and I do think we flirt with those team totals. I'm a little bit skeptical of where this total actually lands and how I will bet it come Super Bowl Sunday. I have yet to bet the total for this matchup between Philadelphia and Kansas City. But, Joe, to your point, this game ended 21-17, 24-21 under our pregame number of 48 and a hook. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked. I would be completely understanding of that game flow and format. 5 teams, including the postseason, all around the NFL this year, allowing fewer than 20 points per game on average. These are 2 of those 5. Philadelphia first, Kansas City top 3 as well. And, Joe, there's been so much conversation. Oh, the refs, Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. That's how they're back in a 5th Super Bowl in the last 6 years. You know who's been there for every single Super Bowl berth as well? Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator for KC. Chris Jones said after the AFC Championship game, you guys think it's all Mahomes. You keep letting Steve Spagnuolo not interview for head coaching jobs around the NFL. In return, as our DC, we're going to be here each and every year.
And they're not wrong, man. I mean, they're not wrong. It's why Philadelphia went out to get Vic Fangio. They knew they needed to upgrade. They know they had the players because, Ben, it's cliche, but defense wins championships. I don't know why we think we've gotten away from that because it still holds true.
Yes, it certainly does. Plenty more on a Football Friday when Hour 2 comes your way next.